Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, 12:30 in the afternoon. The sun is bright. The crowds are cheering. The President of the United States is waving from the back of an open limousine, riding through the streets of a city that wasn't even sure it liked him. And then, in the span of 6 seconds, the world changed forever. 3 shots, or maybe 2, or maybe 4, from the 6th floor of a building, or maybe from a grassy knoll, from a lone, troubled gunman, or maybe from the CIA, or the Mafia, or the Soviets, or Lyndon Johnson himself. 60 years later, we still can't agree. And that, more than the assassination itself, is the story worth telling. Because the murder of John F. Kennedy isn't just a historical event. It is the single most investigated, most analyzed, most obsessed over moment in American history. More books have been written about the Kennedy assassination than about the Civil War. More documentary hours, more declassified documents, more independent researchers, amateur sleuths, retired FBI agents, and Hollywood directors have poured their lives into this one event than perhaps any other in the modern era. And yet, 60 years on, a majority of Americans still don't believe the official story. Why? That is what this video is really about. Not just the assassination, not just the conspiracy theories, but what it means for a democracy, for a society, for a nation's relationship with truth, when the most powerful institution in the world tells its people what happened, and the people simply refuse to believe it. This is the story of the conspiracy theory that refused to die. To understand why this wound never healed, you have to understand the world in which it opened. November 1963. America is at the height of its post-war confidence and its Cold War anxiety simultaneously. The country that had won the Second World War, rebuilt Europe, and put satellites into orbit is also a country terrified of nuclear annihilation, suspicious of communist infiltration, and deeply uncertain about its own government's honesty. The Bay of Pigs invasion, a CIA-backed disaster, had exposed the fact that the government ran secret operations it lied about publicly. The arms race was a source of daily dread. And in the South, a civil rights movement was tearing at the fabric of American life. Into this world steps John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Young, photogenic, Harvard-educated, a war hero with a luminous wife and 2 young children. He wasn't just a president. He was, in the language of the time, a symbol of a new generation, of hope, of an America that was going somewhere beautiful. The motorcade through Dallas was supposed to be routine, a political trip to mend fences in a state where Kennedy was unpopular. He had been warned by advisors not to go. He went anyway. Dealey Plaza, a gentle downhill stretch of road, crowds 3 and 4 people deep on both sides. Jacqueline Kennedy in a pink Chanel suit and matching pillbox hat. The president tanned and smiling, exactly as the posters promised. And then the shots. Governor John Connally, riding in the seat in front of Kennedy, would later say the sound was like a rifle shot. Kennedy lurched forward. The First Lady turned. And then, in an image so violent and so intimate that it has haunted American culture ever since, the President of the United States was gone. He was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital at 1 p.m. Lyndon Baines Johnson was sworn in as President on Air Force One 99 minutes later. Jacqueline Kennedy still in her blood-stained suit, standing beside him. The image is one of the most devastating photographs in American political history. By nightfall, a 24-year-old former Marine and Soviet defector named Lee Harvey Oswald had been arrested. 2 days later, Oswald was dead too, shot in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, in front of dozens of police officers and live television cameras. America stared at its television sets and asked, collectively, what is happening? That question has never fully been answered. 7 days after the assassination, President Johnson established the Warren Commission, a panel of 7 senior government officials, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, tasked with investigating the murder. They spent 10 months interviewing 552 witnesses, examining thousands of pieces of evidence, and reviewing autopsy reports, ballistic tests, and photographic analysis. In September 1964, they delivered their conclusion. Lee Harvey Oswald, acting entirely alone, fired 3 shots from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. 1 shot missed. One struck Kennedy and passed through Governor Connolly, what critics would famously call the magic bullet. The third shot was fatal. There was no conspiracy. The American public never fully accepted it. Within months of the Warren Report's release, critics were already picking it apart. Lawyers, journalists, private citizens, ordinary people who had watched Oswald shot on live television, who had seen the Zapruder film, who knew that the government had been caught lying before, started asking questions the commission hadn't answered cleanly. How did one bullet wound 7 separate entry and exit points across 2 men? How did Oswald, a mediocre marksman by military records, fire 3 accurate shots in under 6 seconds with a bolt-action rifle? Why did Jack Ruby, a man with documented connections to organized crime, have such easy access to the basement of a police station? Why did witnesses on the grassy knoll report hearing shots from in front of the motorcade, not behind it? Why did Oswald's body language, in those 48 hours between arrest and death, look less like a guilty man caught and more like a man confused about why he'd been arrested at all? "I'm just a patsy," Oswald said. "I didn't shoot anyone." He never got to say anything else. By 1966, a New Orleans district attorney named Jim Garrison had become so convinced of a conspiracy that he launched his own investigation, the only criminal prosecution ever brought in connection with the assassination. He charged a local businessman named Clay Shaw with conspiring to murder the president. The trial was sensational. The evidence was thin. Shaw was acquitted in less than an hour. But Garrison had cracked something open. He had shown that official conclusions could be publicly challenged, that the government's version of events was not immune to cross-examination, and he had introduced into the American bloodstream a suspicion that would never fully drain away. Then came the Zapruder film. Abraham Zapruder was a Dallas dressmaker who happened to bring his 8mm home movie camera to Dealey Plaza that day. He stood on a concrete pedestal near the grassy knoll and filmed 26.6 seconds of footage that changed history. The film captured the assassination in graphic, agonizing detail. For years, the film was locked away, purchased by Time Life magazine, and kept from public broadcast. Most Americans knew it existed, but had never seen it. When it was finally shown on television in 1975, on the Geraldo Rivera program, Good Night America, the reaction was seismic. Viewers watched Kennedy's head snap, not backward and to the right, as the Warren Commission's trajectory analysis suggested, but in a direction that seemed to many observers inconsistent with a shot from behind. That single frame, that direction, those 6 words, back and to the left, became the defining shorthand of an entire movement. Physicist after physicist, forensic expert after forensic expert would offer competing explanations. Some said the movement was a neuromuscular reaction. Some said it was consistent with the Warren Commission's findings. Some said it was not. The argument has never ended. In 1979, 15 years after the Warren Report, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations delivered a bombshell. After its own extensive investigation, including new acoustic analysis of a police officer's dictabelt recording from that day, the committee concluded that there had, in fact, probably been 4 shots fired in Dealey Plaza, and that 2 of those shots had probably come from different directions, which meant a second shooter, which meant a conspiracy. The American government had, in effect, contradicted itself. The Warren Commission said 1 shooter. The House Committee said probably 2. Both were official government bodies. Both had access to classified evidence, and they reached opposite conclusions. If the government couldn't decide what happened, why should anyone else? The acoustic evidence the House Committee relied upon was later re-examined and challenged. Other experts concluded the sounds on the recording were not gunshots at all. The committee's conclusions were walked back, qualified, disputed, and yet the damage was done. The official story had a crack in it that could never be fully sealed. Enter Oliver Stone. In 1991, Stone's film JFK brought the conspiracy to a new generation with the full force of Hollywood storytelling. Starring Kevin Costner as Jim Garrison, the film presented a sweeping, operatic version of the assassination as a deep state coup, orchestrated by the military-industrial complex, covered up by the highest levels of government, and suppressed for decades. It was dramatic. It was gripping. It was, historians widely noted, highly selective with its facts. It was also seen by millions of people worldwide and became one of the most influential films ever made about American politics. The film was so persuasive, so galvanizing, that it directly prompted an act of Congress. In 1992, the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act was passed, mandating the declassification and release of millions of pages of government documents related to the assassination. The act gave the National Archives 25 years to complete the process, with a final deadline of 1998. Those subsequent presidents have repeatedly postponed full release, citing national security concerns. That postponement, that continued withholding, has done more to sustain the conspiracy theories than almost anything else. Because here is the brutal, uncomfortable logic at the heart of this story. When a government that has a documented history of lying to its citizens tells those citizens that a classified document about the most controversial assassination in modern history cannot be released for reasons of national security, what is a rational person supposed to think? Decades after the assassination, polls consistently show that somewhere between 50 and 70% of Americans believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone. That is not a fringe position. That is the majority. Across party lines, across generations, across every demographic category. This is not simply a story about a murder. It is a story about trust. And to understand how trust dies, you have to understand the context in which the Warren Commission delivered its verdict. The year was 1964. The Cold War was at its most dangerous. The government's primary concern in the immediate aftermath of the assassination was not historical accuracy. It was stability. It was preventing panic. It was making sure that the Soviet Union didn't think America was collapsing. It was making sure that the American public didn't demand a war against Cuba or the USSR based on unverified suspicions about Oswald's foreign connections. The Warren Commission was not, at its core, a neutral historical investigation. It was a political instrument designed to deliver a conclusion that would calm the country and prevent escalation. Earl Warren himself later admitted that he was persuaded to take the chairmanship by President Johnson, who told him that if the conspiracy theories were allowed to fester, they could lead to a nuclear war. Seal it off. Make it clean. Give them a lone gunman. Whether or not that conclusion was accurate, and there are serious historians who believe it was, the manner in which it was reached poisoned the well permanently. When it later emerged that the commission had not been told everything the CIA knew about Oswald's contacts, about the anti-Castro operations, about the concurrent assassination plots against Fidel Castro, in which both the CIA and the Mafia were involved, the conclusion stopped being a verdict and became a narrative. And narratives can be rewritten. This is the paradox that sits at the center of the Kennedy assassination's legacy. The more aggressively the government tried to close the case, the more reason it gave people to believe the case wasn't closed. The more documents it withheld, the more those documents seemed to contain something damning. The more official investigations there were, the more official contradictions there were. And into that void rushed every theory, every suspicion, every unanswered question, every grieving soul who looked at the most powerful country in the world and watched its young president killed in broad daylight in front of the cameras and simply could not make themselves believe that one disturbed young man with a mail-order rifle was the whole story. Because it felt too small, too random, too meaningless. That is the human element that no forensic report can address. John Kennedy was not just a president. He was a myth. He was the embodiment of a generation's belief in its own future. His death was not just a death. It was the destruction of a particular kind of American innocence. And when something that large is taken from a people, their minds reach for explanations proportionate to the loss. An accident or a random lunatic is not a sufficient cause for that kind of grief. But a conspiracy, a vast, powerful, shadowy force working against the American people, that, at least, gives the tragedy a scale equal to its weight. The conspiracy theory is, in some ways, a form of mourning that never found resolution. What came after the assassination made everything worse. Within 5 years of Dallas, Martin Luther King Jr. was dead. Robert Kennedy was dead. The Vietnam War had become a catastrophe built on government deception. The Pentagon Papers would prove it. The FBI's COINTELPRO program had been spying on and sabotaging American citizens for years. Watergate revealed that a sitting president had personally directed a criminal cover-up and lied about it, until the tape recordings proved otherwise. The Church Committee investigations of 1975 exposed a breathtaking catalog of illegal CIA operations, foreign assassination plots, domestic surveillance, mind control experiments. Every single one of these revelations landed on top of Dallas like another layer of sediment. Each one said, yes, the government does lie. Yes, it does run secret operations. Yes, it does cover things up. Yes, it has killed people it found inconvenient. In that context, believing the Warren Commission required not cynicism, but a degree of faith in government that the government itself had systematically destroyed. This is what makes the Kennedy assassination unlike any other event in American history. It is not the event itself, as horrifying as it was, that has embedded itself so deeply into the culture. It is the way the event became a mirror, a test of how much a citizen trusts their government, how much they believe the official story, how much authority they grant to institutions that have demonstrably lied before. To believe Oswald acted alone is, in some quarters, to be called naive. To believe in a conspiracy is, in other quarters, to be called paranoid. And the fact that Americans have been arguing about this for 60 years without resolution is not a sign of collective irrationality. It is a sign of something much more serious. It is a sign of a democracy that has never successfully rebuilt the trust it lost on that afternoon in Dallas. There are historians and forensic experts, serious, credentialed ones, who believe the Warren Commission's core conclusion is correct, that Oswald did it, that the bullet trajectory is physically possible, that the acoustic evidence pointing to a second shooter was flawed, that the CIA's withheld documents were embarrassing but not conspiratorial, that the simplest explanation, however unsatisfying emotionally, is probably the true one. There are equally serious researchers who believe otherwise, who point to the documented lies, to the destroyed evidence, to the witnesses who recanted, to the suspicious deaths of people connected to the case, to the plain, measurable fact that the government had financial and political reasons to deliver a specific verdict regardless of what the evidence showed. The truth is that 60 years of investigation have not produced a smoking gun in either direction. The physical evidence is genuinely ambiguous in places. The documentary record is genuinely incomplete. And the institutional credibility needed to deliver a verdict that the American people would simply accept has been squandered, over decades of deception on other matters entirely. What we are left with is this: a 26.6-second film, shot by a dressmaker on a sunny Friday afternoon, that loops endlessly in the American imagination. A single frame in which a president dies and a nation's trust dies with him. And 60 years of questions that have generated not answers, but more questions. The Warren Commission wanted to close a door. What it actually did was build a labyrinth, one that millions of people have been walking through ever since, looking for the room where the truth lives, finding only more corridors, more shadows, more locked doors. And every locked door says the same thing it has always said: we're not telling you everything. Whether that means there is something to hide, or simply that governments are reflexively secretive even when there is nothing conspiratorial to reveal, is a question only you can answer. But the asking of it, the refusal to simply accept the official verdict, to demand accountability, to insist that the powerful justify themselves to the people, that impulse is not paranoia. That impulse is democracy. The tragedy of the Kennedy assassination is not just that a young president died. It is that in the aftermath, in the rush to reassure and stabilize and contain, the institutions of American democracy chose to be less than fully honest with the people they serve. And the people noticed, and they never forgot. 60 years later, the wound is still open. The documents are still being withheld. The polls still show a majority of Americans unconvinced. And somewhere in the National Archives, in boxes that have not yet been fully opened to the public, there are files that the United States government has decided 6 decades on that you still cannot see. Draw your own conclusions. That, perhaps, is the most fitting epitaph for this story. Not a verdict, not a confession, not a definitive answer. Just an open question, floating above Dealey Plaza like the smoke from a rifle that may or may not have been fired from the grassy knoll. Permanent, unresolved, and impossible to ignore. The echoes of those 6 seconds have shaped American political culture for 60 years. They live in every moment a citizen looks at a government statement and wonders what isn't being said. In every generation that inherits this story and finds, to their astonishment, that it is still not over. The conspiracy theory that refused to die refuses to die because the questions that created it were never truly answered. And until they are, if they ever are, Dallas will remain the unhealed center of American doubt. If stories like this one move you, if you believe that history isn't just dates and names, but a living conversation about power, truth, and who gets to write the official record, then subscribe. There are more forgotten chapters, more untold stories, more moments where the official version and the real version part ways, waiting for you right here.